meeting is being streamed live on Council's YouTube channel for public viewing. I have a few housekeeping announcements to make. For those joining remotely, when you are speaking, please ensure your microphone, or when you're not speaking, sorry, please ensure your microphone is muted and your camera is off. If you share a presentation on the screen, please stop sharing as soon as it is not needed. Public speakers must only have their cameras on and be unmuted when addressing the committee or answering questions of clarification in those designated slots. The evacuation procedure stand at assembly point 9. On arriving at the meeting, you should have read the emergency evacuation procedure and signed the fire register. Please inform the Democratic Services Officer if you have not. Please can everyone ensure that their mobile telephones and any other devices are switched to silent during the meeting. Since there is only one matter for discussion tonight, when the meeting has ended, I will ask for confirmation that the live stream has ended, and at that point, please will you make your way out of the building either way you came in, remembering to sign out as you leave. The final point I would like to stress is that this is a meeting in public and not a public meeting. And I ask that members of the public attending in person and virtually ensure that they do not shout out or disrupt the committee's deliberations outside of those who have registered to speak in allotted slots. Right, Emily, do we have any apologies for absence?
We do, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Mike Pickles, Councillor Cheryl Briggs, who was substituted by Councillor Sarah James this evening, and Councillor Max Thompson, who was substituted by Councillor Paul Barrow this evening.
Would you like to take roll call of those present, please?
Councillor Paul Barrow. Councillor Ron Batstone.
Present.
Councillor Jenny Hannaby.
Present.
Councillor Scott Horton.
Present.
Councillor Sarah James.
Present.
Councillor Rob Madison.
Present.
And Councillor Val Shaw.
Present. Are there any declarations? Oh, sorry, I've missed minutes. Has everybody read the last lot of minutes?
I propose that we accept the minutes.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Right, okay. Councillor Madison. So can we take a vote?
I wasn't here. So.
And abstentions therefore.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Now we come to
Declaration.
declarations of interest. Councillor Horton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm the ward councillor for the item under discussion this evening, so I'll be stepping back from the table and speaking in a 3-minute slot.
Fine, thank you. Is there any urgent business tonight?
No, Chair.
Wonderful. And there's public participation, and I will actually announce the names of the speakers as they are called. So we now turn to the application for discussion tonight on 16 Cumnor Hill, Oxford. And I think that the first speaker in this matter is actually our officer, who will present the matter before us.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is referred to committee at the request of the local member. The application seeks approval for the demolition of number 16 Cumnor Hill as attached 1.5-storey dwelling and the erection of 2 dwellings, one in the front of the site in the approximate position of the existing house and the second to the rear. This is the application location plan. The site is within areas designated by the neighbourhood plan as being low density and an area of special local character. To the north of the site are dwellings in Martin Close. To the east are 2 buildings containing 15 flats with car parking in the rear of the site. To the south is Cumnor Hill, from which vehicle access is gained. To the west is an access road serving numbers 18A and B, which are to the northwest. Beyond this access road is a detached dwelling. A topological plan of the site is shown. It's not particularly clear on the screen, but essentially what that shows is that there's a significant slope from south to north, i.e. from down from Cumnor Hill to the rear of the site. This is the existing elevations of the dwelling which is to be demolished, showing its 1.5 story design. This proposed site plan showing the position of the two new dwellings. The dwelling to the front is slightly shifted closer to Cumnor Hill relative to the existing dwelling. The new dwelling to the rear is beside the car parking serving the flats to the east, but slightly beyond the rear elevation of the easternmost flat building. Each dwelling has parking to the front, with a garage serving the rear dwelling. The rear dwelling will be accessed via a new access road which runs between the new dwelling to the front and the flats to the east. As the rear dwelling will be built behind the existing frontage along Cumnor Hill, it represents backland development. This is the elevations of House 1, which will be erected in the front of the site, with its 2-story height, but with rooms in the roof. This is the elevations of House 2, the one being erected in the rear of the site, with a similar scale and appearance to House number 1, but with slight variation in its elevational treatment. So this is the section plans. So it shows the streets seen at the top along Cumnor Hill, and then a section through the site showing the slope down from Cumnor Hill and the rear dwellings set position being set down relative to the dwellings in the front. So this is the elevation of the garage, which will serve the dwelling to the rear, and the bin and cycle stores are also shown. The bin stores are shown on the site plan, but the cycle stores are not, and hence condition is recommended requiring details of this. So I'm now going to show some photos of the site and its surroundings. So this is looking at the site from Cumnor Hill with the relatively new flats to the east of the site. So this is the existing vehicular access, and a condition is recommended requiring details of vision displays for this access due to concerns about that hedge that you can see there overhanging vision displays and obviously obstructing vision, which is obviously necessary given that this access will be intensified. So again, these are the two flats to the east. So this is again stood in Cumnor Hill, looking towards the rear of the property, with the access road serving number 18 and 18B, and you can see part of number 18A to the rear of the site, and then you can just about see the ridge of the dwellings in Martin Close towards the back of the site. And again, this is the access road, and these photos are from 2 different site visits, hence the different seasons and weather, just to make that clear. So this is a side elevation of the neighbouring dwelling to the west, and it's beside that elevation that the dwelling to the front of the site will be erected. This is the side elevation of the flats to the east, and this is taken in the rear garden of the site, looking towards numbers 18A and B, which obviously already been erected to the rear of the development along Cumnor Hill. So this is looking towards Martin Close, sorry, and obviously you can see that the relative difference in land levels given the ridge height of those dwellings being set down. So this is the rear projection, sorry, of those flats to the east. And this is looking towards the western neighbour from the application site, showing its rear elevation. This is looking up towards the existing house, and again note the change in land levels. So this is looking towards the flats to the east, and you can see the clay roof, the clay tiled roof, that building, the rear elevation that building, sorry, is the proposed dwelling to the rear will be slightly beyond that. This is stood in the car park. To the east of the site, beside which the dwelling to the rear will be erected, and the rear of the tarmac, the new house will be slightly beyond that. And again, this is from the same car park, but looking towards the dwellings in Martin Close. So this photo is actually stood at the rear boundary of the site, looking towards the dwellings in Martin Close, sorry. And this again shows the difference in land levels, given that this is obviously this is a standing height and you're almost level with the first floor windows. So Cumnor Parish and several local residents have objected to this application. Officers consider that the main areas of objection are the impact of the development on the character of the area and the compliance with neighbourhood plan policies, the impact on neighbours' amenity, and the impact in terms of flood risk and the suitability of the drainage. The development is backland development, which policy DBC1 of the neighbourhood plan seeks to avoid, where this undermines the strong character formed by common plot shapes, sizes, orientation, and building to plot ratios. The site is also within a low density area identified by policy DBC3 and an area of special local character identified by policy DBC5. For the reasons outlined in the report, the specific context of this site with existing backland development to the north and northwest, its position set down from Cumnor Hill, the distance which will remain between the two dwellings and their neighbours, and the building to plot ratio being comparable to surrounding properties, are considered to ensure that development does not harm local character nor conflict with the neighbourhood plan policies. Regarding amenity, the distances between the two dwellings and neighbouring properties are considered sufficient to prevent significant harm to amenity, even when the relative change in land levels between the site and its neighbours is considered. In respect of flooding, the site is essentially impermeable, and hence infiltration for surface water is not feasible. The slope down the site from Cumnor Hill also means that gravity cannot be relied upon to transport surface and foul water to public sewers at the top of the hill. To overcome this and to ensure that flood risk is not exacerbated in the local area, it is proposed that surface and foul water will be pumped from the bottom of the site up to the top of the hill. The council's drainage engineer is satisfied that this is acceptable and in this instance, and that the system has sufficient capacity to deal with flooding and failure of the pumps without increasing the risk of flooding to other properties. As, subject to the recommended conditions, officer considered that the development would not be harmful, and in the absence of objections from technical consultees, it is held that the application accords with the policies of the development plan and the MPPF. Therefore, it is recommended that planning permission be granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Nat. We'll come back to you later if we have any questions for you. Our first public speaker is Councillor Lawrence Waters, who's from Cumnor Parish Council.
Yeah.
If you'd like to sit there, yes, and you have 3 minutes to address the committee when you're ready.
Okay. The overall comment, the Planning Officers Committee report para 32 misstates Cumnor Parish Council's objections. For example, failing to record Council's objection under Neighbourhood Plan Policy DBC 5, Lower Cumnor Hill 3rd Acre Rise Area of Special Local Character, and not accurately representing the objection under Policy RNE2 Flood Risk. Contrary to Neighbourhood Plan Policy DBC 1, Backland Development, the Planning Officer in paragraph 7.8 acknowledges the development will represent backland development, but then argues that the specific context of the site means the application accords with policy DBC 1. However, this is clearly contrary to Neighbourhood Plan Policy DBC 1B, avoiding backland development. Contrary to Neighbourhood Plan Policy DBC 3, design in the low density areas, and DBC 5, development in Lower Cumnor Hill, third acre rise of special local character. The planning officer believes the application accords with DBC 3 and DBC 5, arguing that the location is within the built-up area of Botley, so repeating one of the many inaccuracies of the applicant's documentation. Contrary to neighbourhood plan RNE2 flood risk, the planning officer considers the application is in accordance with policy RNE2. However, the officer erroneously states, paragraph 744 of his report, that the site is outside of the groundwater flooding risk zones from the MBC flood risk assessment. As map 15 on page 45 of the MBP shows, the site sits in the zone of potential groundwater flooding, as depicted by the green shading, Oxford Clay geological contract, zone of uncertainty 10 metres vertical, and blue shading, groundwater bearing strata 10 metres above Oxford Clay formation. Policy RNE2, which specifically mentions Cumnor Hill and Dean Court, applies. In addition, and ignoring the steeply sloping site that slopes downwards towards Dean Court and the Ensham Road, the application doesn't include any assessment of the impact on groundwater levels on the site and on adjoining properties in Martin's Close, etc., of digging the 225 square metre proposed foul stormwater storage basin in the garden of House 2. This proposed basin, with a minimum depth of 400 millimetres, could hold more than 65 cubic metres of water. That's 65,000 litres, weighing 65 tonnes.
You have 30 seconds.
No detail, sorry.
30 seconds. You have 30 seconds.
Oh, sorry. No details are providing on the impact of that on immediately adjacent dwellings in Martin's Close, which are an elevation of 1 to 3 metres below the lowest point of the proposed site. What happens if it leaks or fails? The planning officer considers the overlooking issues from House 1 to House 2, from House 2 to Martin's Close to be acceptable, as they fall on the limit 21 metre separation required. This has not taken into account the topography of the site and the adjacent properties in Martin's Close, again, requirement of MBC policy DBC 5.
Fine.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. I was just about to tell you that you.
I did time myself.
Does anyone have any questions of Councillor Waters? The only question I have, and it's a sort of a general one, is, I mean, how often have there been incidents of flooding in that particular
There have been
area?
instances, yes, there have. And dead opposite across the road is a lane that runs down from Hurst Rise Road, and there is an open ditch that runs along the side of the road and goes underneath the road, but it often floods across Cumnor Hill. It did this winter across Cumnor Hill and into the adjoining properties on the other side, but it dissipates. You start putting concrete down, the car parks and things, it's going to go somewhere. Yeah.
So connected with that, do you know whether the houses in Martin Close have suffered from flooding coming down the back garden onto their property?
So that I couldn't tell you. No, they have, I hope, have put in their own side.
Right. There are no further questions for Councillor Waters. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Catherine Davies. If you'd like to take the seat, and you have 3 minutes when you're ready.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I've worked in planning and conservation for nearly 40 years, mostly in local authorities, but latterly with Historic England, where I worked on helping communities throughout the South East understand the character of their area, because it can be quite difficult to articulate, to enable them, specifically to enable them to engage effectively in the neighbourhood plan process. So when the Cumnor neighbourhood plan was under preparation, as a local resident, I undertook similar workshops with local people to help them understand how to express the significance of the character of an area, that is, what matters and why. And this formed the basis of the policies in the neighbourhood plan, including the area around the application site designated the Lower Cumnor Hill area of special local character. And the neighbourhood plan policies on design and built character were based on this. And it has resulted in housing set in large blocks, giving a semi-rural character with views out to open countryside. Some fairly recent planning permissions have given that have been given for backland development and for demolishing large, perfectly good houses to intensify development on plots. This, as has been noted in the planning officer's report, has begun to change the character of this localised part of the wider area. And policy DBC5 of the neighbourhood plan was formulated specifically in order to prevent further erosion of the character. The applicant's planning statement appears to dismiss the validity of the neighbourhood plan and focuses on the previous consents for intensification of use in the area. It fails to acknowledge that the neighbourhood plan is the means by which the NPPF and the local plan are implemented at the local level. They're not different policies. In support of the application, the statement references an appeal which was allowed prior to making the neighbourhood plan, but he doesn't refer to a more recent appeal against the refusal of planning permission on 45 Cumnor Hill, which was dismissed as being contrary to neighbourhood plan policies, in particular DBC5. Here, the inspector confirmed that the neighbourhood plan adds locally specific policy detail to local plan policies.
You have 30 seconds.
Oh, crikey. If planning permission was granted for this development on the grounds that the character of the area has already been compromised, then this argument could be used to justify further similar proposals. Two wrongs never make a right. I request, on behalf of the residents who gave up so much of their time, years of it, in the proper making of the neighbourhood plan, that the committee determine this application in accordance with the neighbourhood plan and local plan policies and refuse. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Davis. Does anybody have any questions? No? Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. In addition to Dr. Davis, we have had statements from 3 other objectors to the application. These statements have been distributed to all of us, and I'm sure that we have all read them. Our next speaker is Alex Creswell, who is a supporter. I can see you.
Good evening.
I can hear you.
Thank you.
You have 3 minutes when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. I don't have a particular speech to make. I've just been interested in some of the comments that we've made, and I thought it might be worth giving an alternative view, perhaps, on some of the points raised. If we refer to DBC1, which is being referenced in respect of backland development, I think it's important to actually read what the text says, because it doesn't say you can't have backland development. It said it should be unavoided where it affects the character of the area. Now, if you look at the aerial photography of the site and its context, there's quite clearly backland development adjacent to the site, and the character of the area is backland development. I appreciate the thrust and importance of the neighbourhood plan and what it's seeking to preserve further up the hill, but I just can't see that the special character that is important up the hill is being diminished here, given the character is already what we're proposing to do. I noticed also that reference is being made at great lengths about flooding and drainage and so forth. If you look at your officer's report, there are, I believe, 3 conditions which are quite stringent and heavily require further information before development can proceed. And we have, on I believe 3 separate occasions, provided drainage information, and I'm by no means a drainage expert, but you would hope your drainage officer was, and he is happy with the information that has been provided. Very quickly, 45 Cumnor Hill was mentioned. I actually dealt with that appeal. It was the appeal was not dismissed on the basis of backland development or increased development on the site. It was the fact that because it was a flatted scheme, the associated activity related to that would have been harmful to the character of the area. And I think that's distinctly different from what's proposed here, which is one additional family house, bearing in mind there is already one family house on the site. Thank you.
Right, fine. Thank you, Mr. Creswell. Are there any questions? Don't see any, so thank you very much.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you. And now Councillor Scott Horton, who's the ward councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. It appears I'm once again before you discussing an application for backland development on Cumnor Hill. We have quite recent precedents on this. I remember sitting here for the application of 134 Cumnor Hill. And it's quite clear to me this application should be rejected, as you know, many of the reasons being put forward by Cumnor Parish Council and by many of the neighbours. There are 4 points which I view as critical, which are the overarching issue of backland development in this area, the issue of overlook, the issue of emergency vehicle access, and the issue of drainage. If I start with backland development, I'll quote the relevant section from DVC 1 of the Cumnor Neighbourhood Plan, because it says that the principle that's in question here is maintaining the strong character formed by common plot shapes, sizes, orientation, and building to plot ratios by avoiding backland development that will undermine this character. That is an overarching statement for the entirety of the Cumnor Neighbourhood Plan. It's clear to me that this is precisely the kind of backland development this neighbourhood plan sets out to prevent, and it should be taken into consideration that the neighbouring buildings were built before the existence of this plan. Furthermore, sticking with DVC 1, I do believe that this application is playing a little bit fast and loose with the first point in DVC 1, which is maintaining a common 1- and 2-storey character that borderline, so there's nothing else wrong with them. Moving on to DVC 3 and DVC 5, DVC 3 is trying to maintain a general low density character of the area. DVC 5 is a more specific policy and states that development proposals located within this area should demonstrate they pay full regard to the characteristics and contribute to significance of its local architectural and historic interests. And I put it to the committee that this has not been demonstrated. It then states the effect which development proposals would have on the character of this area in determining planning applications must be taken into account. The zoning planning applications concerned in weighing proposals that directly or indirectly affect the character or appearance of the area of special local character. A balanced judgment will be taken having regard to the scale of any harm or loss to the character or appearance and the public benefits which may otherwise arise. I put it to the committee that harm posed to the local character is not outweighed by whatever benefits this development may bring. On the issues of overlook and overshadowing, the proposed buildings are substantially higher than the buildings on Martin Close, as well as themselves already being taller than the buildings on Martin Close. The difference in altitude due to the topography means that while the plan may meet minimum separation requirements for buildings on level ground, these buildings are not on level ground. Thus, the ground floor of the new buildings will be looking directly into the first floor windows of buildings on Martin Close. Thank you. And all floors will be overlooking all of the external amenity spaces. Couple this with the scale of the new building located to the southeast and uphill from its neighbours, I fear that it would indeed be quite over-dominant and potentially lead to a loss of light. Thirdly, matter of emergency access. The officer's report notes that the minimum of 3.7 metres of width is required apart from for gateways, which may be 3.1. The narrow section on the plan is not a gateway, it's approximately 12 metres long, which has the potential to seriously hamper access were it needed in an emergency. On drainage, you heard from Councillor Waters.
3 minutes.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for Councillor Horton?
Thanks, Scott. I'm not sure it's a question for you or for Matt, actually, but I'll try you anyway. As you look at the site from the road, there's the drive that runs down to the left, and then there's the two big buildings, houses.
You're referring to number 18A.
And they presumably they were before the new neighbourhood plan was.
Correct.
But you still have.
Are there any more questions? Councillor Mattison.
Thank you, Chair. Would it be correct to say that you were concerned that emergency vehicles would not be able to access the site or would have trouble turning around? What specifically would be the issue with emergency vehicles?
The issue, I believe, is simply on access. The width of that driveway does not meet the building regulations, to my understanding, certainly. As I say, it is, as far as I am aware, supposed to be 3.7 meters wide, and there's a elongated section that is only 3.1 meters wide. It's a concern that was also raised by Parish Council in, I believe, all of their responses to this application.
Any more questions? No? Fine. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for our officer? Yes, Councillor Hammerby.
Well, or you can go first.
Actually, I'll go first with a very quick question. On 7.2, is this site in Boxley or Cumnor?
So it is in, so the local plan designates certain areas as certain hierarchy of settlements, and Botley is a local service centre, and Botley is a blanket thing for the whole contiguous, if that's the word, settlement around Botley. So it goes all the way up Cumnor Hill essentially. So even though everyone knows it is Cumnor Hill, for planning policy terms it is Botley, because that's the local service centre, and that's the reason that the principle is acceptable. So it's planning policy statement essentially.
So that means all of Cumnor is actually a local service centre and not a bit.
Not Cumnor Village. So that is obviously completely separate. It's this bit that's that there's no, with Botley all the way up the hill essentially until it stops.
Yeah, thanks. Let's get you to ask your question.
Right, so I've listened quite, and I've read very intently the excellent report. So I think, as far as I'm concerned, what I've heard here, the officer has answered the questions in a very reasonable and, I believe, satisfactory manner. I looked at the planning considerations on page 17, principle of development. I think you've answered that. Design and character. I believe the design and character is not dissimilar to what's there and what has already been put up, but I'm wondering if you would like to comment on that.
Yeah, so I think obviously this is in an area designated as low density and as having a special character. And then there's the general policy that seeks to avoid backland development where it undermines the common plot shapes, etc. But I personally, the specific context of this site is such that it is not out of keeping with its concept.
That's exactly
because there is existing backland development. So it's the effect of the policy is not to stop all backland development. There has to be an assessment as to the impact of that backland development.
So I think that's very important to have that said again. Access and parking, I believe that this is being looked into and that a fire tender would be able to go up there.
So the council is correct. There is a section which is narrower than what building regulation says, but there is a provision within building regulations that small sections can be smaller than that. Obviously, I'm not a building control officer, but there is an alternative as well that properties in this situation can provide sprinklers within the property to overcome any issues in terms of access by firefighters.
And I took a special note of the flooding and drainage in that area, because local people do actually know what happens, because we know in our own area. However, our drainage officer, has not got any major concerns, but he is asking for stringent plans, which we would expect him to do. Waste and recycling. Well, if you do have a house in the background, and you do sometimes have to bring your own, that would be up to the person that might buy the house if it's built. I think you've answered that question,
Jenny, do you have any more?
Yeah, well, and
questions
just whether that I'm
about
asking
those
him,
statements?
in his opinion, is it in your opinion that you've answered that correctly? Perhaps I'm not asking the question
Yeah,
in the
so-
right manner.
So there, the design guide gives minimums, and obviously it's a guide, it's not policy.
Yeah.
But between the houses on the site itself, there's over 21 meters between the rear of the new house and the front of the new house.
Mm.
The design guide doesn't specifically address that relationship. It gives back to back and front to front. So there isn't a guide for that, but it does exceed the back to back, whereas the front elevation of the dwelling has less of an anticipation of privacy, and hence front to front is 10 meters, but front back to back is 21. So I think the 21 meters between the front of the house to the rear and the new house at the front is sufficient to prevent harmful overlooking. And then it's 21 meters from the rear house to the back boundary of the houses in Martin's Close, but then a further 5 meters to their actual rear elevation, so which exceeds the 21 meters from the design guide. But it is accepted that obviously there is a change in levels, but that additional 5 meters should be sufficient to prevent this being significantly harmful. And there is obviously boundary treatments on that boundary again, which reduces that harm as well.
And the last one then is to ascertain that it's still a 2-story building, but that has rooms in the roof.
Yeah, so
It
it's
can be quite
it's
normal.
a 2.5-story dwelling,
Yeah.
but with a 2-story height,
Yeah.
because obviously the rooms of the second floor, sorry, are in the roof.
Yes, that's
But the height is of a 2-story house.
yeah. So I think that needs to be clarified. Because people are saying it's a 3, and it isn't. I think that's me done. And thank you.
Mr. Barry?
So I'm interested in the drainage now, Becky. So because it's fairly low down compared with the road, obviously there's a pumping station for the surface water, and then if that fails, there's the attenuation tank.
So there's 2 pumps. There's a main one and a standby, and then if they both fail or there's a complete loss of power, there's then yes a tank to hold, and it's essentially enough for 24 hours of a loss of power of the pumps,
Okay.
and also the level of flooding in a 1 in 100-year flood event. So a significant flood, it would have enough capacity.
So
hold that.
I mean, I can see the one pumping station just behind house 2. So where's the second one?
So the
Oh,
There's-
it's by house 1, isn't it?
yes, there's only the pumps are only. So I think it's a single pump, but within that are 2 pumps. That makes sense.
Okay. But it's a standby.
Yeah, there's a standby, and then there's even if they both go, there's still consideration of that.
So is that the case with foul water as well? Like just the one
So
pump?
the foul water doesn't have, but obviously the foul water is just a single pump.
Yeah.
But obviously that won't have surface water going into it. It will just be
No.
the foul water. So that has less of a potential for overflowing from flooding, etc.
I guess
Because
it
it's
does.
just from the pipes from the house.
Residents wouldn't know until it does overflow.
Yeah.
Or
But obviously, yeah, the drainage engineer is happy, and
Yeah.
so he did initially reject the application. And as the agent said, we've had 3 iterations of drainage details, and that they're now happy. And we've got the conditions requiring them to do what they've said they're going to do, but also a compliance report to demonstrate they've actually installed it which is the sort of another belt and braces approach to the drainage.
Councillor James?
Got a couple of questions, if I may. Thanks. I noted that a number of residents, particularly in Martin Close, raised concerns about shadowing, and obviously it's quite a high house, and it's on higher ground, and it looks to be built up on a slab from the plot. It's not sort of set down into the ground.
No, so the ground level at the front of the house is then the floor level. So
Yeah.
there will be an element of leveling that
Yeah.
ground.
And it's pretty much south of Martin Close as well. So I couldn't see what the ridge height is, and I don't think on the topographical data that we had it showed out into the topographical data for Martin Close. So it's a bit hard to know how much lower that is. Are you confident that it won't shadow
Yes, I think
those houses even in winter?
so. I think the distances between them is sufficient to prevent significant harm. There might be an impact. I don't think it's significant such that it will warrant refusal of the application, purely because yes, it is immediately to the south, but obviously that will be part of the day, and obviously most of the year the sun will be high enough in the sky that it will avoid that the ridge of the new house.
Yeah, I think I'd be particularly concerned about losing daylight in winter, which is when the sun is low, of course, and the shadows are particularly long. I did have a second question as well. So I was a bit concerned that the cycle parking there's no diagram of that, because I noticed that the requirement from OCC highways was that it needs to be covered secure cycle parking for 12 bikes for each house.
Yes.
And on the drawing there is only a picture of a little cycle store that holds 2 bikes, and I think it's, you know, I was sort of picturing 6 of those. I mean, you're talking about the size of the garage.
No, so the
going in there. Where are they going to go?
Yeah.
And I was I was a bit concerned that that wasn't
the condition.
shown.
The condition requires details to be submitted, so that they would have to conform to the amount of spaces that OCC require, and also we obviously need to see where it's going to go. So it almost supersedes the image that they've provided of the cycle store.
But I mean, is there even enough room on the plots really for that without sort of blocking the road, the car access?
Yeah, I think there is enough space to accommodate that within the curtilage of each dwelling.
Would it be possible for the condition to be clear that it is for 12 cycle spaces? Because I was a bit concerned the fact that the planning application came with a picture of storage for 2 bikes. I wondered whether that had been properly taken on board actually.
So yes, it is possible. Yeah, at the moment it doesn't specify, but obviously once, yeah, it is possible to do that. Yeah, essentially.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions for our officer?
No, I've got more, I suppose.
Please do concentrate.
So when you say that the backland development doesn't harm the sort of character of the area, because there's similar in adjacent plots, is that quite subjective? Because when I look at the plan, it doesn't look to me like there's similar in adjacent plots. It looks to me like the look of the Cumnor Hill plots is that there's a dwelling and quite a long land plot around it. And I know that that's not technically true for number 18, but because they're so far back, they don't look like they're in that Cumnor Hill plot in the same way that this will. And I know it's no further back than sort of next door but one the other way up the road, but that's kind of because of the angle of the road rather than because that's set further back in its own plot. So I sort of wonder how that balance is decided, or is it simply that it is a balance?
Yeah, exactly that. With all design things, it is a subjective judgment, and yet people have differing opinions on it. My opinion is that the context, its immediate context, is such that in this specific instance, it is not harmful. But obviously, a different view would be that it is.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions?
Just looking at the conditions, I believe you have covered everything. Is there anything else you think? In fact, there's quite a lot of conditions they've got to cover. Is there anything that you
I think
feel
that
should be on there that we should be taking special interest in?
I'm aware of, no, obviously, unless you did want to make that change to be more specific about the cycle storage.
Well, I find it extraordinary that there's an extra water that we have 12 bikes, but you know, as long as there's a bike store and you can get bikes in it in some form or other, but that will come out in the conditions.
Yes.
I think you've strengthened the conditions there. There's quite onerous conditions on there for them to bring forward that you've got to agree. So I think as a committee, we've seen that you have covered all the aspects, and our drainage engineer is actually okay at the moment, subject to
Those conditions.
the drawings,
Yes.
but he's quite content with what's been put forward. So I think that's all I have to say on this, and thank you.
Just one small point. I mean, if this were approved, are there any conditions as far as construction traffic is concerned? Can it all be accommodated on site? I mean, I know that the number of times I've driven down Cumnor Hill and had to get around you know, sort of vans and lorries from construction work. It is really irritating,
Yes.
to say the least, and very disruptive to
Any
generally.
building is, any construction is.
I mean,
but I think
can the condition be put on that
If-
construction traffic has to be on site?
Well, I don't think as the local authority we have any legal power to prevent workmen, as long as if they're parking in the highway, there's nothing we can do about that as a planning authority.
Right.
So, and I think,
Maybe we should.
so yeah, I think a construction traffic management plan could be imposed if you thought it was necessary. But I don't think that would extend to where workmen park their cars. I just don't think that's enforceable. So it just have to be hoping that they're not
Inconsiderate.
inconsiderate. Yes.
Right, okay, fine, thank you. Well, if there are no further questions for our officer, would someone like to propose a motion? Councillor Madison.
Thank you, Chair. So I would like to propose a motion that we do not allow planning permission for this application. I'd like to thank our officer for his report, for answering our questions and elaborating on his reasoning, especially regarding the backland development, which I see as really the most important aspects that we're going to be discussing. As the part that's got the most room for interpretation, the most different interpretations that you can balance. For me, to sum it up, I think that it's clearly fairly strongly expressed in the neighbourhood plan that they do not want to see backland development. Now you can quibble a little bit about the exact wording, and I appreciate the approach on, you know, word it this way, word it that way, but I think when you get down to it, they don't want to see backland development, and that really is the message I'm getting both from our speakers tonight and what I think is the intent and the spirit of the neighbourhood plan. And given that we should attach significant weight to the neighbourhood plan and the local democratic voices, so to say, I think we should not allow the permission. I think that's basically sums up what I'm suggesting.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Thank you for sharing that. Can I just push you slightly on in terms of you've said the neighbourhood plan does not want to see backland. Can you explain to me in terms of the harm?
So we've heard that it's considered an area with a special local character, and part of that character is having a low density of developments and housing. And in putting two buildings on this plot, as opposed to the one that we have currently, it's increasing the density, increasing the footprint on this plot, and that I think contributes to a harm toward the nature the special nature of the area, which has been formally put forward in the plan. That's summarise, I would say, on that.
Right, thank you. Is this something that you feel would be worthy of a site visit, or is it something that you want to make a decision on this evening?
I would be perfectly happy to attend a site visit if the committee were minded that way. I think for me personally, I probably have seen enough tonight to feel comfortable voting. But equally, if people would like a site visit, I would be more than happy to attend.
There isn't a second.
Yeah,
No,
there's
There's not a second,
Yes,
but anyway, before we can start doing.
James, you
I'm happy to second.
fine.
I have a different point of view, but could we have a vote on that, please?
Or some discussion.
Or whatever you, discussion or whatever. Yeah, I wouldn't want to rush this one through. I think it's worthy. Well,
Right, I believe that a site visit is called for in this case. I think it's looking through the documentation, it's very difficult without a site visit to work out all the different aspects of the firstly of the officer's report, which I agree is very good, but secondly, all the objections. And it's difficult for me to envisage that without a site visit. I think it is possible that after a site visit, we might agree that it should be approved. So I think to reject it at this stage, I don't think we have sufficient evidence to do that. And I think a site visit would, in my view, give the committee an opportunity to decide for or against.
I think that on the whole, I would feel happier about a site visit. Regardless of the final outcome, I think a site visit would actually be very, very helpful. I mean, all the photographs are wonderful, but it still doesn't give you a feel for what's on the ground.
Yes.
We
I will have a different opinion on what on the what's been put forward to vote on this evening, but I would be quite content to go on a site visit. I think that would be sensible, and we'll probably have more councillors back that might be interested as well when this comes back.
Right, so do you refuse? Yes. Fine, so we now can we vote please on the motion to refuse the application? All those in favour? Those against?
We'll take a chair's casting vote.
I was going to say, I think that leaves me in the unfortunate position of having to give a casting vote, and I will be voting against refusal.
And so can I propose that we have a site visit?
Can we now have another motion?
Well, my motion would be to accept all the recommendations of the officer, but you've already said a site visit. So maybe the recommendation should be that we have a site visit first.
That we defer the.
And we defer,
tonight.
yes, and I think I would like, whilst I believe this is excellent and I do know the area well, I think I would like to go on that site visit with as many people that's interested. If that's, I need a seconder on that, then I would need a seconder on that.
Seconder on deferral.
Defer.
Fine. So any debate on deferral?
I guess, yeah, I'm surprised actually we haven't had a site visit already, I think, from before we got to the committee, but,
Well,
I know.
it's who puts their,
yeah.
through
Right.
you, Chair, depends on who, I did put my hand up, but, the ward councillor got there first. But I do feel that for everyone's sake, a site visit would be a fair and practical thing to do.
Fine. Yes, I would support that. So can we take a vote on deferring this in order to for a site visit to be arranged? So those in favour? Those against? Abstentions?
Yeah, that counts.
Thank you.
So, yes. Yeah, for the site visit. Susie,
We've got one more item, sorry, Chair.
oh,
We've got the appeals report.
my apologies, yes. And the appeals report is to be noted.
Yes, it is, thank you, Chair. Yes, please to draw your attention to the final item, which is appeals performance, which is before you this evening.
Can I just, it's just a comment really, I mean, it's, it's an interesting application, but I have feelings about it as well. I'll be on the site visit, can I request that I come on the committee to, for the final decision as well?
Sorry, we're just, there's one final report, we can discuss that after
Okay.
Councillor Barrow. So nothing further to add, thank you on that item.
Fine.
Are we all happy to note the appeals
Yes.
report then?
Indeed.
Check for you, thank you.
In which case I will close the meeting and Susie, can you let me know when the live stream event, please?
Second,